Comcast Business helps retailers become seamlessly restocking, frictionless paying favorite shopping destinations. It's how nationwide restaurants become touchscreen ordering, quick-serving eateries, and how hospitals become the patient-scanning, data-managing healthcare facilities that we all depend on. With leading networking and connectivity, advanced cybersecurity, and expert partnership, Comcast Business is powering the engine of modern business. Powering possibilities. Restrictions apply.
Now's the time for a great deal on a new Honda. It's time to drive smarter with high-tech features and excellent reliability. Check out the Honda Civic, Accord, or HR-V. For a limited time, well-qualified buyers can get a 4.99% APR on a 2025 Civic or a 3.99% APR on a 2025 Accord or HR-V.
See dealer for financing details. Exclude Civic Si and Type R.
Walk on over to Walters as part of your opening day, whether it's before or after the 4 p.m. Nats game against the Phillies. Walters is located at the corner of N and South Capitol Street, across from the ballpark.
And welcome to Nats Chat for Friday, March 22nd, 2025, what is the season preview installment of the Nats Chat podcast, as this is season number 5 of this podcast, and we are here to discuss season number 21 of the Washington Nationals. Yes, the 2025 season is the Nats' 21st season. The Nats now are of the legal drinking age. And along with a man who has covered the Nats since the franchise moved to Washington, D.C., MASNsports.com, Nats insider Mark Zuckerman, who was in West Palm Beach, Florida, site of 2025 Nats spring training. I'm Al Galdi, host of the Al Galdi podcast. I'm a lifelong resident of the D.C. area, have been talking D.C. area sports via radio or podcast for 20 plus years. It is great to be with you. There is a new episode of this podcast for the morning after every Nats regular season and, dare I say, postseason game. Weekday, weekend, does not matter. We encourage you to subscribe to the podcast. If you're not already doing that, subscribing costs you nothing. Make sure that you never miss an episode. Helps out the podcast a lot. We are very grateful for all of you who have been with us here. We are happy to say that this podcast is on the short list for Best Baseball Podcast for Sports Podcast Group for a second consecutive year. That is because of you. So thank you. You can find us on X at Nats_chat. You can find us on Blue Sky at Nats Chat Podcast. You can email the show, natschatpodcast@gmail.com. If you would like to sponsor the show, if you would like to advertise your business or practice, hit up the man who runs this podcast, who founded this podcast, the great Tim Shovers. Again, he can be reached via email, natschatpodcast@gmail.com. And we have a website that we invite you to check out too, natschatpodcast.com, at which you can purchase a Nats Chat Podcast t-shirt. There is a lot that we want to get into on this season preview installment of the podcast. But Mark, I mentioned that you've covered the team since it came to DC. Do you know when exactly you became a Nationals beat reporter? Like when exactly your tenure starting the team started?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if I have a specific date for you. The background there, for those who don't know my history, I was working at the Washington Times back then. When I first came to town in 2001, I covered the Orioles for 2 seasons, 01 and 02. And after that, my editor asked me if I'd be interested in moving over to the football beat to cover the now Commanders team. And I did that, but there was always this understanding that if DC got a baseball team, that I would get to cover that team as the beat writer whenever that happened. So 2 years later, of course, it happened. So what I remember is you have that big day, late September, where the official announcement is made the Expos are moving to DC. I'm covering football at this point, and we had other people on the staff. Our friend Tom Lavero, Eric Fisher was the sports business writer, who really were covering the relocation story. So they kind of handled all that. And then as that football season played out, I kind of backed off from covering them on a day-to-day basis and started covering the news of the new baseball team, like signing Vinny Castilla and Christian Guzman. So that offseason was kind of split between the Nationals and the football team. And then once football season was over and we kind of hit the new year and we're moving towards spring training, I was full-fledged on the beat. So it's a little strange. It's not like there's that one day that I officially went to do that. It was a little bit of a transition period there. And so, yes, I've covered them from the start, but that start was a little bit haphazard, as probably was appropriate given the state of the organization at that time.
Well, my favorite thing about you covering the football team is that if you ever watch the Sean Taylor of Football Life documentary on NFL Network, at one point they put up an article on Sean in the Washington Times, and there on the byline is Mark Zuckerman. And I have it on good authority that the highest quarter-hour rating was the quarter-hour featuring your byline. So there you go, generating ratings for NFL Network.
Yeah, no, that was a big time story. I do actually remember at the time, like covering him coming up, and there was a lot of stuff about him that was going on in those first couple of years, and it made for some good copy, I guess. I also was there for the infamous Steve Spurrier's final press conference. That was my first year covering the team, and there's some photos where you can see me among a whole group of other writers kind of listening in, jotting down notes as he says, well, 5-11. Not very good, but at least we weren't the worst team in the league.
Hey, we wound up 5-11. Not very good.
I think that's when I knew this guy isn't long for this job, and it turns out he was not. So I had Spurrier's last year and then Joe Gibbs' first year, and both of those were quite an adventure and quite interesting. But my heart, I enjoyed covering them. I was glad to do that. It was a good experience for me. My heart was always in baseball, and so I was glad, as so many people were, when the Nationals came to town in 2005 to be able to take over that. And to say that 20 years later, I'm still covering that team for, the third different outlet since then is pretty remarkable. And I don't take that lightly. I've been very fortunate to be able to do this for 20 years and keep covering the same team.
It's amazing looking back on this. And like I said, I've lived here my whole life. For the longest time, it was just kind of considered like that's just how it is. There is no MLB team in Washington, D.C. I mean, this area went a long time without an MLB team, 1972 through 2004. So to now have the Nats beginning their 21st season here, it's just a remarkable thing. Like, if you're like me and you grew up in the 80s, early 90s, like you didn't have an MLB team here. And you just kind of accepted that. Like, it was this pie in the sky thing that MLB would return to Washington, D.C. I mean, D.C., two-time loser of MLB. And now it's almost unthinkable that a major market, the nation's capital, went so long without an MLB team. And, in hindsight, we look back on the two runs of the Senators. There was a lot that went into those two teams not succeeding here. Principal among them, the teams not being very good and not being very well run. And the DC market has grown so much, and to now have it as a top 10 media market, it'll never be again that Washington, D.C. will not have an MLB team. But I will never take for granted that Major League Baseball is in D.C. because if you're like me and you grew up in this area, or you just were in this area for the time during which there wasn't an MLB team, like that was something that you didn't have it, and you kind of said to yourself, all right, we're probably not going to get an MLB team again for whatever reason.
Well, think about it this way. I grew up, as people know, in Phoenix, Arizona, and didn't have a major league team throughout my childhood. And you would hear over the years growing up about, possible expansion and, or relocation, which didn't happen until 2005. And the cities you would hear about in the running for new teams were always Washington, D.C., Phoenix, we got the Diamondbacks, Tampa Bay got the Rays, Denver got the Rockies, Miami got the Marlins. I remember Buffalo for a long time was seen as a potential site for it. Well, fast forward now, DC was always that carrot for a long time there. Once they expanded, now, we could always move a team to DC. And that was if you don't build a new stadium, we're going to move this team to Washington, DC. Once that happened, what's the biggest market left that doesn't have one? There isn't that real carrot. It was maybe Las Vegas for a while, and now the A's, in theory, are moving there. What's left? It's, Charlotte, Raleigh, Nashville, Portland, maybe going back to Montreal. It's not the same caliber. DC was in a whole category of its own, and it's pretty crazy when you think about it, that a city of that size and importance went 33 years without a team, was bypassed by those other smaller cities for expansion teams. Thankfully, it finally happened. I think everybody would agree that even if there's been some bumps in the road along the way, that it was 100% the right choice and that this is a long-lasting thing. There's never any talk of the Nationals leaving town and going anywhere else. DC is going to be a Major League Baseball market for a very, very, very long time.
Yeah, and as we have discussed, even during the course of this rebuild, it's not like attendance for Nationals games has ever really truly cratered, and I think in a lot of ways, now is when you really judge a market as a baseball market, not when things are going well, but when things aren't going so well. Like when you quote unquote bottom out, what is your bottom? And look, it's not like the Nats have been a top 10 attendance team these last few years, but it has never gotten to the point where you're like, oh my gosh, this is embarrassing in terms of like the official attendance numbers. There certainly have been games in which, there aren't a lot of people in the ballpark, right? But every team has that. But I actually find it encouraging what we've seen, especially from an attendance standpoint at Nationals Park these last few years. So MLB opening day is on Thursday, March 27th. We are preparing for the Nationals to begin their 21st season, and the Nats slowly but surely are trimming down their roster. We on Wednesday afternoon had the Nats announcing a bunch of roster moves, including reassigning multiple players to minor league camp. Among them, third baseman Brady House and outfielder Stone Garrett. And among those optioned to AAA Rochester, outfielder Robert Hassell III and infielder Trey Lipscomb. No surprises, but when it comes to who we are monitoring as the regular season begins in terms of who could be promoted from the minors to the majors, House, Hassell, are those the top two names as we get into this season?
Certainly among the position players and guys who would not just be called up for like a complimentary role as a backup or, they may call up a reliever or something because they need that. But like a true cornerstone piece who could be a part of this for a long time. Yeah, those are the two to watch. And I think it's notable. They both had very good springs. Hassell probably a little more so. He had that like eye-opening, like, wow, this guy arguably could have been the best all-around player on the team this spring when you consider hitting for average, hitting for some power, running the bases, playing great defense. It really stood out that you could look at that as an outside observer and say, this guy looks like he could be a big leaguer. House maybe not quite there yet, but the defense at third base, everybody says, is going to be really good. And the offense is getting there. We're still not seeing the power yet from him that I think most people expected from him when he was drafted, but he hit 364 at a 462 on base percentage. So, I mean, that's good stuff from what's still a 21-year-old, let's be clear. I didn't think either ever had a serious chance of making the opening day roster, which is fine. They both need some time at AAA, and they both need to dominate at that level in a way that they have not done yet. But if they get off to good starts and perform the way they're supposed to and stay healthy, number one, they've both had some injury issues in the past, more so Hassell, they're going to be knocking on the door. And the best thing they can do is kind of force that issue and make Mike Rizzo and Davey Martinez have to think about, are these guys ready? If we called them up, how would we use them? Who would go? I don't know when that's going to happen, if it's a month into the season, 3 months into the season, 5 months into the season. But these two guys should both be on their radar as they open the 2025 season. And you had last year the big ones, Cruz and Wood. You have the guys who've been here for a few years, the young cornerstones like Abrams and Garcia and Gore. This is that next group that I think kind of would complete the first wave of prospects that we've talked about. There's another group that's several years away that's much younger, but that first wave that we talked about really from the start of the rebuild in 2021 and 2022, they're almost all here now. I think these are the last two pieces of that puzzle, and I do think we will see them at some point here in the season, maybe sooner rather than later. It's going to be a combination of their performance at AAA and also what happens at the positions that they might be taking over at third base and in the outfield.
Hey, Al Galdi here for Window Nation. The only thing more amazing than the Masson dispute finally ending is the latest great offer from Window Nation to listeners of the Nats Chat podcast. 2 free windows for every 2 windows that you buy, and you pay nothing until 2027. This offer is good for now through March 31st. Schedule your free estimate. Call 866-90NATION or visit windownation.com and tell Window Nation that you want the deal that you heard about from Al Galdi on the Nats Chat podcast. Window Nation windows are the best. Times are tough financially right now. One of the best investments that you can make is on home improvements, especially ones that increase the value of your home and save you money in the long run. Window Nation windows do just those things. 866-90NATION, windownation.com to Window Nation that Al Galdi sent you, and make sure that you get the special offer. 2 free windows for every 2 windows that you buy. Pay nothing until 2027. 866-90NATION or windownation.com. That's 866-90NATION or windownation.com. And tell Window Nation that Al Galdi from the Nats Chat podcast sent you.
Now's the time for a great deal on a new Honda. It's time to drive smarter with high-tech features and excellent reliability. Check out the Honda Civic, Accord, or HR-V. For a limited time, well-qualified buyers can get a 4.99% APR on a 2025 Civic or a 3.99% APR on a 2025 Accord or HR-V.
See dealer for financing details. Exclude Civic SI and Type R.
Swinging a chopping ground ball to the right side. In between Hop, Garcia has it to Abrams at second. Throw to first. Double play to retire the side. So just like that, Brad Lord is out of it, inducing a 4-6-3 double play.
If you go by MLB Pipeline's top 30 prospects list for the Nats, Brady House is the Nats' number 4 prospect. Robert Hassell III is the Nats' number 12 prospect. All the way down on the list at number 23 is Brad Lord. And the rise of Brad Lord as national spring training has gone on really has been something. He is still in Major League camp, and more it is looking and feeling like he could make the team's Major League regular season opening roster. Brad Lord was taken by the Nats in the 18th round of the 2022 MLB draft out of the University of South Florida. You know, his exhibition season stats aren't exactly sparkling, but he's sticking around. He's making his case as a long reliever. And Mark, this really is something you're usually not stunned by anything that you see in a spring training. This may qualify as stunning that Lord has lasted this long.
It was really not on anyone's radar because he's a starter. He's a starting prospect, and they are actually looking at him as a reliever at the moment as we record this. You mentioned the stats. I want people to be careful not to be misled by what those stats say. You're going to see a 6.57 ERA for him and a bunch of runs and a bunch of hits given up. Almost all of those came in one game that he pitched against the Rays, and it was one in which there were a couple of defensive plays that weren't made that could have maybe been called errors. They weren't. They were called hits, and that turned into a snowball effect where the rest of the inning got out of control and all the runs were earned. They very easily could have been unearned. So every other outing he's had has been good. Here's what to me is intriguing about it all. This is a starting prospect for them. This is someone that I'd put in a similar category a year ago to DJ Hurst and Mitchell Parker, and the year before that, Jake Irvin. Somebody who they knew kind of had a breakout season in the minors and is on their radar. And if we need to call up a starter at some point, we could see him and maybe he sticks beyond that. But what they're doing here is saying, you know what? He's got a really live arm, and when you use him in a shorter burst of 1 or 2 innings, he's topping out at 97 miles an hour. Do we have to send him to AAA to be a starter every 5th day? Or could we actually use him in the bullpen? This is not something the Nationals have done traditionally. There are other teams that will take a young starting prospect, put him in their Major League bullpen, and use that as the path to him ultimately starting for them. It doesn't mean he's going to be a reliever for his whole career. The Nats have tended, in almost every single case, to say, we would rather have you be at AAA pitching every 5th day and then being on standby if we need a starter than putting you in the big leagues now in a bullpen role and having that be your transition into the big leagues. But they are strongly considering this as we speak. He got to pitch back-to-back days a few days ago. They wanted to see how he came out of that. By all accounts, he felt good coming out of that. I don't think that final decision has been made yet as we sit here and record this, but he is very much in the running for a bullpen spot. And again, that does not mean that he wouldn't ultimately start for them, but that they believe he could be of real help to them right now in the bullpen. And that's one of several signs I've picked up on this spring that says to me things are a little different right now. They are more focused on trying to field a roster that can win as many games as they're capable of winning, as opposed to sticking straight to the development plan. And we will sacrifice short-term gain for potential long-term benefit.
Well, and that leads me to our next topic, Evan Reifert. The Nats on December 11th selected reliever Evan Reifert in the Major League phase of the 2024 Rule 5 draft. But the Nats this past Tuesday afternoon announced having returned Reifert to the Tampa Bay Rays. We talked about this. I think it was the last episode of the podcast. We certainly have discussed this, the idea of, okay, in recent years, the Nats have made selections in Rule 5 drafts and have kept those players on for the entireties of seasons, right? Think Thad Ward, think Nasim Nunez. Here you had a guy in Evan Reifert, gets taken this past December. He really struggled this exhibition season. 7 games, 6 1/3 innings, 12 runs, 11 of which were earned, 9 strikeouts versus a whopping 12 walks. Would the Nats hold on to him? The answer is no. They sent him back to the Rays. That certainly seems like a sign that things are different and that the Nats, if not a win-now team, certainly are more focused on wins and losses for this coming season as compared to in previous recent seasons.
Yeah, 100%. Now, I mean, he pitched his way out of any chance that he might have had. I don't even think in the scenario they were in a year or two ago, they could have justified putting him on the big league roster given those kind of numbers. Or if they did, maybe they'd give him, a few weeks, and if it didn't work out, then they'd cut ties. I don't think they would have stuck with that for a whole year. But it is another sign of what you're talking about there. And, they knew it was a gamble with him. He had really big strikeout numbers in the minors, but he also had high walk totals. And so I don't think they were shocked by how it went. They were probably disappointed, hoped that he had done better. But that, to me, was pretty much a no-brainer decision on their part. And I was glad to see them do it because it does indicate, again, that you hear the mantra of we're taking the best 26 players north with us. That's not actually true. And there are valid reasons for not taking the best 26. It's not about that. It's really about making sure you have the best 35 or 40 for the course of the season that are going to be available to you. But a move like this, sending him back, considering Lord for that spot, I think what they end up doing with like the last spot on their bench is going to be an indication of this, that they really are more focused now on having 26 guys that they want to use. They really don't want to have to stash anybody away and just get through it with them this season. They want to feel like whoever's on that team has a role and Davey Martinez can use him in an attempt to win a baseball game. Doesn't mean that they're saying, hey, we're all in, we're trying to contend this year. But I do think it's a significant move and a difference from the last several years, and probably the most since entering 2021, I would say, that they are going into a season viewing their roster in that kind of way, which is, if you're on this team, we're counting on you to do something to help us win games.
And as we know, partaking in a Rule 5 draft usually is a sign that you're not a very good team, because if you're a very good team, you're probably not even willing to carry someone on your major league roster for the entirety of the upcoming season who may not be worthy of being on that roster. When the Nats took Thad Ward in December 22 in that Rule 5 draft, he was the Nats' first pick in a Rule 5 draft since the 2010 Rule 5 draft. You wonder if we're now done with the Nats making Rule 5 draft picks for a while here, right? You have Thad Ward, December 22, Nasim Nunez, December 23, and Evan Reifert in December 24. Be interesting to see what happens in this upcoming December. But we are not there yet. We have a season to take place here. Mackenzie Gore is, in fact, the Nationals' official opening day starter. That announcement has been made. The Nats' regular season opening roster is coming into focus. And yeah, about the 2025 regular season. So the Nats have not had a winning regular season since the World Series championship season of 2019. The Nats coming off losing seasons in 20, 21, 22, 23, and 24. Do things finally change in 2025? There is rebuild fatigue amongst Nationals fans, and justifiably so. I will ask you this, and then I'll answer the question. What do you think would qualify as a successful 2025 season for the Nats?
I do think the bar is being raised internally. Certainly externally, I think everybody wants to see it better. But I do believe, and I think we talked about this coming into the spring, the idea that internally they are expecting more of themselves this year, that this year is more about the actual results and not just about calling guys up and finding out what you have and, well, all right, we really like this kid, but he's not quite ready yet. And, we got to wait until this happens until we can really start evaluating it. So I do think there is more emphasis on that. What does that actually look like? I think internally they believe that they want to and should win more games than they lose. I think they can be a winning team with a winning record this year. And there's probably deep down in somebody's minds this idea of, hey, they could actually contend if everything fell into place. I think they still know that they're not quite there yet, in all likelihood. that there are still some other moves to be made, that there's some growth that needs to happen from the young guys, and that, quite frankly, this division is going to be awfully tough, and that makes it even a steeper challenge for them to try to contend yet. So I don't think it means that they have to have a winning record for it to be a successful year. I think if Dylan Cruz and James Wood are everything they're supposed to be, and if CJ Abrams bounces back from what happened in the second half of last year, and Mackenzie Gore looks like a true frontline starter, and Jake Irvin is a solid piece, and if Hassell and House come up and do their thing, I think regardless of the record, you will say it was a successful year. But I do think internally they feel like they need to see the results. 71 wins doesn't cut it. And I don't know what that would mean as far as changes for next year, but that would be a huge disappointment. I think they feel like they should at least be in the running for a winning record this year. If they don't quite get there, it could still be a successful year. But I think in their mind, that's probably the goal.
Yet, to me, I think the win total needs to start with an 8. I think they need to be in the 80s somewhere for this to be a successful season, because that will mean that the young players did well. It's almost impossible for them to have a season like that without the young players doing well, because the team, for the most part, is constituted of young players and now has this abundance of building blocks at the major league level to where, okay, if the team demonstrates, 9, 10 win improvement, it's going to almost certainly be because the James Woods and Dylan Cruz and CJ Abrams performed as we want them to. The last few years, I have not been caught up in wins and losses. I don't think you have. I don't think a lot of Nationals fans have been. I think that time has changed. I think, back-to-back 71-win regular seasons has helped to change that. I think the rebuild fatigue has helped to change that. And I think that, look, well, yes, in theory, you could have, say, a 76-win regular season, but Wood and Cruz are great, and maybe you lose a lot of close games, so you can live with the 76 wins. Okay. I think by and large, generally speaking, it's time for this rebuild to translate into wins. And if you look at most successful rebuilds in MLB in the modern era, by year 4, year 5, you start winning. And if you don't, there's something wrong. And if this is another season in which the team has, a win total in, say, the low to mid 70s, I think you do have to really start asking some questions of what are we doing here. So I think it is about wins and losses more than it has been. I think another interesting telltale sign will be come the trade deadline. Are we talking about the Nats being sellers, or is that not even part of the conversation? So that'll be an interesting storyline to follow. But, especially with the way that Davey Martinez has been speaking, to a lesser degree, the way that Mike Rizzo has been speaking, they seem like they're ready for this team to win. And that if it doesn't win, that's going to be a sign that things aren't as they should be. It's a confusing time right now because there is mixed messaging. On the one hand, Davey and Mike have spoken the way that they have spoken. On the other hand, if you go by the way that Mark Lerner spoke to the Washington Post a few weeks ago, it feels like the Nats are kind of still in rebuild mode. And, Mark Lerner was talking about, well, this past offseason wasn't necessarily the right time to be spending. That's usually the way you speak when you're in the midst of a rebuild, not trying to come out of a rebuild. Now, maybe that was just posturing on Lerner's part, but in other words, mixed messaging. But I think generally speaking, you look at this, you say, okay, rebuild started with the fire sale of 2021. It's now 2025. A good number of the promising players are at the major league level. It's time to win. And in the case of Davey, given his contractual situation, I think there is pressure on him to win, especially when you throw on top of that the fact that he brought back his entire coaching staff. And that seemed to be something that he himself championed as much as anyone. That was one of the more stunning things of last season. The Nats in the middle of August saying, yeah, we're bringing back all of our coaches. That's Davey saying, I have faith in my staff. That's Mike Rizzo also backing up Davey in that regard. But I do think there's pressure on Davey to have a good season, and not just in terms of player development, but in terms of wins and losses.
I think there should be pressure on him and pressure on Mike Rizzo, for that matter, because it's ultimately a reflection of the roster that he's assembling. And I think they themselves would say they are trying to put pressure on themselves. What I don't know the answer to is what you kind of alluded to is, how does ownership feel about it? If the team wasn't making that stride that you're talking about, and they are still dealing with a losing record, would they feel like it was time to hold Rizzo and or Davey accountable for that? Or are they already conceding that they weren't necessarily believing that this is the time to win yet and that they're still a year away? I don't know the answer to that. I think that'll be pretty telling. But I do think everyone from the GM spot down feels like they need to start winning more and cares more about that. And, you mentioned the trade deadline earlier. I think that's another good example of a difference, a shift in mindset that I'm seeing here. While they did sign some guys to short-term deals, Josh Bell, Michael Soroka, some of the relievers they brought in. I guess Kyle Finnegan even falls in this category because that's a one-year deal for him. In the past few years, we'd be talking about those guys as, okay, you hope you get what you can out of them for 4 months and then flip them at the trade deadline. That could happen. If the team is not good, they could go that route. But they didn't sign these guys with that intention. The intention was these are players who can help them win more games this season. And if things go the way that Mike Rizzo and Davey Martinez want them to, Josh Bell and Michael Soroka and Kyle Finnegan are going to be on the team the entire season because they're still going to be trying to play for something come August and September. So I think that's another telltale sign of what the mindset is. Now, that can change. If they are bad, if they get to the All-Star break and they are way out of it and not even sniffing 500, the mindset can change and say, okay, well, here we are once again looking at being sellers and trading veterans for prospects. But they really hope they're not in that position. And that was not the intention going into this. And again, from the baseball ops department down, they believe that they should take a step forward in wins and losses this year. I don't know what ownership thinks about that, though.
3-1, swung on, line to deep right. Harper back, looking up. This is going, and it's gone. Goodbye. An opposite field laser beam line drive, 3-run home run for Josh Bell on the 3-1 pitch from Matt Moore.
What about home runs? We, for years now, have talked about the Nats need to hit more home runs. To the Nats' credit, they do not shy away from needing to hit home runs. Mike Rizzo and Davey Martinez have been plenty vocal during the spring training season about the team needing to hit more home runs. It's not like they're in denial about this. They get it. Here's something that you may not know. The Nats, in terms of home runs, went down last regular season as compared to the previous regular season. The Nats for the 2023 regular season were 29th out of 30 major league teams in home runs with 151. We last offseason had the similar conversation of, okay, are the Nats going to hit more home runs this year and maybe possibly, and here's a path by which they could. Well, the Nats for the 2024 regular season were 29th out of 30 major league teams in home runs, 135. So the home runs went down and by a decent amount. Here we are now, third consecutive offseason. Are the Nats going to be better at hitting home runs? To put this sort of into perspective, so the number one team in terms of hitting home runs for last regular season was the New York Yankees at 237. Again, the Nats were at 135. A middle of the pack total is like 170, 175. So in theory, you're saying, okay, can the Nats somehow add 30, 40 home runs as compared to what the total for the team was last regular season? On paper, you'd like to say yes. I think there is a path by which that could happen. But like I said, we had this conversation last year. So what do you think about the Nats' potential to hit more home runs this coming season?
I do believe that this will be a dramatic shift overall for the team. And the reasons for that is not just the moves they've made, but the growth of the internal players they already have, and specifically James Wood and Dylan Cruz. We saw that James Wood, and we've seen it again this spring, can hit the ball extremely hard, and he does elevate it. It really, it's spring training, so take it for what it's worth, but it's really not that case of, oh, everything's a 105-mile-an-hour ground ball. He is hitting balls in the air on a line. He's hitting the ball to the opposite field with tremendous authority. This is a guy who you'd like to believe over a full major league season. I know he hasn't played a full major league season yet, and he's still young, and maybe there'll be some holes in the swing and some adjustments he has to make. But I think there's legit 30 home run potential there for this year, and maybe even more than that. I think Dylan Cruz may not be the same kind of power hitter at this stage of his career, but he's certainly someone capable of hitting 20, I would imagine. We know C.J. Abrams hit 20 last year, despite having an awful second half. There's reason to believe that that can continue at least the same, if not better. Third base, we haven't talked about third base. What a black hole it was for them last year. More than first base, more than DH, more than any other position. Third base was a huge black hole for them. Now, I don't know what Paul DeJong is going to ultimately be for them. But the track record says he's going to hit some homers. He's going to play great defense. That's going to be an improvement from what they had last year. Nathaniel Lowe at first base, maybe not a true slugging first baseman, but he is going to hit for some power. Josh Bell, it is his number one goal, his number one priority to hit home runs. You'd like to think that that can happen. Luis Garcia hit, I think, 18 last year in his breakthrough season. Outside of center field, where you know Jacob Young, that's just not his game. That's really the only spot in the field that you say they have very little home run potential. Even Keibert Ruiz could hit 20 homers in a big league season, I think. So they're not all going to do it, but there are 8 spots in the lineup that you say could have legit power and a big-time power bat in left field, potentially in right field. If Brady House does come up and does something at third base, there's potential there. We know Abrams can do it. We know Garcia can do it. We know Josh Bell can do it. Out of all that, you'd like to think that you can find 30 to 40 more home runs. Maybe not challenging the Yankees at the top of the league, but I think they absolutely can be a middle of the pack offense this season, specifically because of a power increase.
And that would mean so much. That would make such a difference. Just adding 30, 40 home runs to that total. I think if just that happens and nothing else happens and everything is the same this season as compared to last season, that right there is good for 5, 6, 7, 8 more wins at least. The home run is a big deal, and that the Nats have not had that these last few seasons has been a big problem. You know, when you look at the slash line stats, the Nats for last regular season were 16th in the majors in team batting average, were 17th in the majors in team on base percentage. The problem was the home run. The offense actually, aside from the lack of homers, wasn't that bad. And that may sound not believable, but it is. Like, the offense wasn't that bad. Guys did get on base, even with the lack of walks. The Nats hit a bunch of singles, including like leading the world, it felt like, in infield singles. But whatever, guys got on base. And if the home run was there, I think the offense ends up looking a lot better. So it's just like kind of that one thing. If you get that one thing, things all of a sudden really come together. And yeah, on paper, I think there is tremendous potential for this team to hit a bunch more home runs. What about the stolen base? This was quite the saga last year, right? The Nats began the season on fire in terms of stealing bases. And then as the season went on, became extremely and maddeningly inefficient at stealing bases, but kept trying to steal bases. And we talked about that on the podcast. The Nats for the 2024 regular season were number 1 in the majors in stolen bases at 223, but also were number 1 in the majors in times caught stealing at 73. Do you expect the team to be as aggressive on the base paths in terms of stolen bases this season as compared to last season?
So I think last season there was a calculated effort on their part, knowing that they were not a power hitting team. They knew what their deficiency was, to say, we're going to have to find other ways to do this, so we're going to run at will, as it turned out. And you said there were times that it really made a difference, and they were really good at it, and there were times that they killed themselves running into outs. And I think because of what we just talked about, they know internally that they should hit more home runs this year, and that they have a lineup that's more balanced and more centered on power than it has been in a while, that they will tamper down the running. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to not try to take advantage of it. They have several guys who should be great base runners. Jacob Young, we know, can do it. CJ Abrams, we know, can do it. Luis Garcia was actually he was their most efficient base stealer last year. He can do it. We know James Wood and Dylan Cruz can run as well. So I don't think they're going to, abandon it altogether. But I do think they're going to be taking it down a notch, understanding that you have a much better chance this year, even with the guy on first base, of scoring that run than you had last year, where you felt like he had to get himself to second base or third in order to get that run home. There's much more possibility now of getting a runner home from first, and don't sacrifice an out just in an attempt to get those extra 90 feet. So I think you will see less of it, regardless of what the number of stolen bases is for the team. The percentage has got to go up. That's the number one key here. If you're efficient at it, then you can run. If you're not, put on the brakes, let the big boys try to hit the ball out of the park or to the gaps and score your runs that way.
Yeah, and percentage is a really big deal. The Nats for last regular season, a stolen base efficiency of 75.34%. Back in the day, that would have been great, but with the new way that things are done, including with the larger bases, you really want that percentage to be even higher at like 80%. So it's a funny deal, too, because, again, the Nats began last season and they were sensational at stealing bases. And that was like a big theme to the early portion of last season. And then like things almost on a dime, it felt like changed. And the Nats never really like adjusted to that. When it comes to pitching, and we'll do our season predictions momentarily, but if I said to you, the rotation versus the bullpen, what do you think ends up being a bigger strength? If one ends up being a true strength for the Nats this coming season, which one do you seeing as being more likely to be a strength?
So I actually have more faith in the rotation right now than in the bullpen. I think Mackenzie Gore is primed to take that step up and be a number one guy. I think Jake Irvin is going to be good and solid in the workhorse for you. Although, in a weird way, his last start this week against the Cardinals, his velocity was down. He got hit hard. He insists that physically everything was fine with him. They let him get to the sixth inning and throw 91 pitches, so they don't have an injury concern there. Maybe there were some mechanical things going on. He had a great spring and then all of a sudden hit that wall. Hopefully there's nothing to it. It's maybe a little dead arm thing or a mechanical glitch, but I want to believe that he's fine and he's going to be the workhorse of the staff. I think Michael Soroka, to me, he's the X factor of the whole team. If he's good, this team has a chance to be very good. If he's not, it could really hurt them. Everything we saw from him this spring was positive, so I think there's a chance for him to be quite good. And then Trevor Williams, you're not expecting greatness, but if he can give you 5 innings, give you a chance, that's great. And then I think Mitchell Parker is going to open the year as the number 5 guy, but they have other options if he's not up to it. I feel fine about the rotation. Not a great rotation, but I think good enough to keep him in games with potential for some dominant starts out of Gore and occasionally Irvin and Soroka. The bullpen right now, it was my biggest concern coming into camp just because they didn't have the arms. Even now that they have them, I don't know what to make of that group yet. They haven't pitched a lot, the big name guys, some because they signed late, some because it was by design to hold them back, some because of little nagging things. Jorge Lopez had a hip issue that came up here in the second half of camp. I haven't seen enough of them, honestly, to really have a sense of what they're going to be. Bullpens are so hard to gauge in spring training anyways because of the way they're used, what they work on, who they're facing late in these exhibition games. I think Kyle Finnegan's going to be fine. I think we know what he is at this point. I think Jose Ferrer is going to be really good, actually. But beyond that, I just don't know what they're going to have there, how that's going to work out. I really hope that they don't have too many of these games where they score some runs thanks to some extra power, get a good solid start, and then not necessarily that they blow it in the ninth, but that they can't even get it to the ninth with a lead. If you're losing games in the seventh inning or the sixth inning, whoever comes in to replace the starter potentially, if they don't go deep, that's probably my number one concern right now going into the season. It could turn out fine. They may all be fine, but at this point at the end of March, I just don't feel like I've seen enough to really have faith in that group as a whole.
It's funny with bullpens because the volatility of them, the unpredictability of them at the same time gives you reason for both optimism and pessimism. If you look on paper, so many of these guys are flawed, have struggled in recent seasons. And so you say to yourself, okay, well, there's like no certainty here. But on the other hand, you say, well, they are relievers, and this is a bullpen, and these things are unpredictable. And so often, like a guy who looks like he has no business doing well ends up doing well. So maybe it all does kind of come together. But I'm with you. I think the bullpen's a concern. Last season, the bullpen actually ended up being like a sneaky strength. Maybe that happens again this season. But, I look at Jorge Lopez. The recent track record isn't good. They get a guy like Lucas Sims who has things that you really like. He can strike out the world, but he also walks the ballpark, and his strikeouts have come down in recent years. So you say to yourself, okay, you're relying on the likes of a Lopez, of a Sims. We already know the deal with a Kyle Finnegan. A guy who got a minor league contract, and Colin Poche has been considered a given for the bullpen for a while. You're trusting in a lot of people who give you some reason for trust, but who also tell you, yeah, there's a reason why this guy was available and why this guy might not do well. So we'll see with the pen. What you would hate to see is what you just said, that this ends up being like a 2017 or a 2019 in terms of the regular season where you end up losing so many games that you should win, and it's just that the bullpen couldn't get the job done. So yeah, the bullpen, for what seems like the umpteenth time in Nats history, is a concern going into a season. All right, prediction time. We get on record These predictions are not worth much. Trust us on that. But, what's the point of doing a show like this if you're not going to prognosticate and say what you think is going to happen? And then we could all laugh at how wrong we end up being. But a final record prediction with some thoughts on the Nats 2025 season. Mark, you go first.
All right. I think this is a much improved team. I think the lineup, as I said, could be legit, if not really good. James Wood, Dylan Cruz are going to be the stars of this team, and maybe stars within baseball here, potentially as soon as this year. CJ Abrams as well, I put in that group. I think the rotation is solid, as I said before, especially the guys at the front end of it. I do have bullpen concerns. That may bring my win total down a little bit. But ultimately, here's what I'm basing my decision on. If they were in the National League Central Division, I think they could be a wild card contender, maybe even contend for that division, because of how wide open that one is. Unfortunately, they're not in the National League Central. They're in the National League East, which is a bear of a division to have to deal with. The Braves, are going to be good. The Braves had everything that could possibly go wrong for them last year did go wrong, and they still won 89 games. They're going to be better than that. They're actually my pick to win the division. The Mets are going to score a ton of runs with the lineup they've assembled. I have concerns about their pitching staff, but they're going to outslug a lot of teams, and they're going to be in the mix there at the end. The Phillies are all in. They might be nearing the end of their competitive window. They're an older team with a lot of big-name veterans on there. They're going all in to try to go for it this year before maybe they get over that hump and can't be that same contending team anymore. The Marlins, I'm not concerned about. They might be one of the worst teams in the league. But if you're the Nationals, you got to face those three big boys. Can you at least hold your own against them? I have concerns about that. And so that brings my number just down. I would love to pick a winning record for them this year. I think it's possible. I absolutely think it's possible. But to do it, they would have to do halfway decent against those three NL East foes. And I'm worried they aren't there yet. And so I've got them just below that at 79 wins. I would still consider that a successful year if things play out the way that you wanted to and the young stars are really good and Gore is really good. And you say, well, we're just not quite at that level of the rest of the division. And maybe that spurs ownership next winter to say, hey, you know what? We've got the pieces here, but if we want to contend in this division, we're going to have to spend more to account for that. I think that could all happen. I think it could still be a successful year. But I'm not quite there at the winning record. I've got him at 79 wins for this season.
Well, that would be an 8-win improvement, which usually is good. And that would be significant improvement for sure. So it has been a lengthy rebuild for the Nats. It has been, in a lot of ways, an unconventional rebuild for the Nats. I mean, I still go back to what happened, a year or so ago, where the Nats, in the midst of the rebuild, revamped their front office while keeping the man at the top of the front office and Mike Rizzo. That is an unusual thing to do in the middle of a rebuild. The Nats did that. Of course, there has been the ownership uncertainty during this rebuild. So, there's been a lot to process here these last few years. But something that has happened and that we should not lose sight of is the Nats have done a good job of accumulating promising young talent. However you feel about this rebuild, there now is an abundance of promising young talent at both the major and minor league levels. And if you're familiar with the phrase too big to fail in the financial market, the corporate world, right? I don't want to say that the Nats have too much young talent to fail in terms of the rebuild, but I think there is something to be said for when you have this much promising young talent. Well, it maybe doesn't all work out. It doesn't all fail either. And in the cases of guys like James Wood and Mackenzie Gore and CJ Abrams and Luis Garcia, we already have seen them start to work out to varying extents. So I think the Nats are going to have the season that I thought they were going to have last season. I predicted 82-80 for last regular season. That did not happen. I'm predicting that for this regular season. I think this is what last season was supposed to be, but wasn't for whatever reasons. I think James Wood is going to have a big year. I think he's going to hit 35 homers. I think he's going to make the All-Star game. I think we're already seeing that this guy's the real deal. I think there are far more questions about other guys. I actually don't have that many questions about James Wood. He did well at the major league level last season. I think Mackenzie Gore has a step forward season. I'm really excited to see what he ends up doing. We've talked about the potential for the Nats defense to be a lot better. I know we've had that conversation in years past. It does feel like this is the year that the team finally is back to being good defensively, because on paper, there's just so much to like with this team, defensively speaking. And then you think about what a Brady House could add whenever he's summoned to the majors, what a Robert Hassell III could add whenever he is summoned to the majors. I do worry about the pitching. I'm bullish on Gore. I'm bullish on Jake Irvin, although, like you said, the diminished velocity thing is not what you like to see. But I have major questions about Michael Soroka. Trevor Williams, to me, I don't know what to think. He was so good when healthy last season, but he ended up having a small sample size of a season because of the injury. So it's like, okay, I mean, he's not going to pitch to the tune of an ERA in the 2s again, but is he going to be the guy who we saw 2 years ago, or can he be a guy who, say, pitches to the tune of an ERA in the 3s, let's say, over 20-plus starts this season? And then, you wonder about Mitchell Parker and DJ Hers, Cade Cavalli. I mean, what do the Nats have in him? And the bullpen, like we just discussed, I think there are a lot of reasons for concern. I think the pitching, more so the bullpen, could cost this team this season in a way that was not the case last season. The bullpen was good last season. I don't know about this season. We'll see, but I think it's a real question mark. But I think 82-80, I think you come out of the season feeling good. Like you said, the division seems brutal. Although I tell you, and we've seen this in sports so many times, when you feel certain about something, that's almost always when the something ends up not being what you thought it would be, right? So like everyone on the planet right now would say spots 1 through 3 in the National League East will be made up of, in some order, Mets, Phillies, Braves. When something is that obvious, it feels like so often in sports that's not what happens. And so if one of those teams has a disappointing season for whatever reasons, the Nats would be the team that could perhaps creep into that top 3 in the National League East. And if they're going to go 82-80, they will be in the wild card mix for at least a decent chunk of this season. And that, to me, would be a win in and of itself. If come the trade deadline, we're not talking about the Nats being sellers, and we're talking more about where the Nats are in the wild card standings, even if it's, they're vying for the 3rd wild card spot and they're 5 or 6 games out. But if we can at least be having those conversations, I think that's a victory in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I agree. That would change the narrative so much. And I really do believe they want to be in that position. They don't want to be thinking about selling pieces at the deadline. They want to feel like they're in the race. And I always think it's interesting. There are different paths to get to that win total, whether it's 82, like you said, or 79 for me. And I think that can also change the narrative. Is it you got off to a good start and, hey, boy, this is a team to be excited about, and boy, maybe they might put this all together, and then, oh, you know what, they faded at the end. All right, well, that's still, hey, that's encouraging, and add some more pieces of that, and they're set for next year. Or is it, oh boy, they were awful in April and May. They're not really in the conversation, and then they quietly start to creep up over the second half of the year, and you get to the end and say, oh, wow, they were never in the race, but they actually didn't finish that far out of it because of a strong second half. I think it's a very different mindset narrative that you get from those two scenarios. So I'm curious to see which way it goes. I really think they need to get off to a good start. Emotionally, I think so. Psychologically, from a fan interest standpoint, all of that. I don't know if they can handle a really bad April. I think they need to win some games and be around, if not over 500 late in April. I think would make a huge difference for them. We'll see if they can get there or not. But I'm just kind of amazed here that if you've listened to us, and this is our 5th season doing this, if you would have guessed that 2 years in a row, Al Galdi would be more optimistic than me on the team's chances going into the season, I'm not sure how many people would have predicted that. I'm going to attribute that to not a change in my mindset, but change in your mindset. I think you're finally a glass half full, maybe for the first time. And I like this trend. Maybe I've rubbed off on you. I don't know. I like the fact that you are feeling more optimistic. That's more my kind of take on things, generally speaking. I'm glad to see you've even gone beyond where I am.
Well, you are known as Mr. Optimism in many circles, but no, I mean, I don't know. Sometimes people are like, you're the negative one on the podcast. I just go by what I see, right? So you speak the truth. And so if you see things that are good and encouraging, I think you acknowledge that. And if you see things that are bad and discouraging, you acknowledge that. And look, in 2021, when we started this thing, I thought there were real concerns, and they ended up selling off a bunch of pieces. So I think those concerns were valid, but they've accumulated talent. I'm excited to see what happens here. What about attendance? What kind of a season do you anticipate for the Nats in terms of attendance? Do you think we see a significant increase, or are we not there yet?
Well, as we've discussed before, very often attendance does not necessarily reflect how you're doing that year, but how you did the year before. There is a carryover effect for that. So I do have some concerns that there's a lack of buzz and excitement for this team coming into the season. Not saying that that's fair. Maybe there should be more than there is. I have a little concern that we're not going to see that. And it's another reason that I say I think it's important to get off to a good start. If you have a good first half and you're kind of surprisingly in a race, you can generate that kind of buzz. And all of a sudden, this summer, you have people saying, hey, I want to go to the Nats game. Like, this could be fun. They've got a big series coming up with the Mets or the Phillies because they're in the race with them. We've seen that a handful of times in the course of their history, even if they didn't maybe get there at the end. So I would love to see that happen. It's why I think their better path to 80 wins, give or take, would be a good first half and then falling off in the second half, as opposed to a slow start and then finishing strong. I think they do need to generate some buzz, get people excited about them, and to see what you and I think most of our listeners who really follow them closely have seen is that there is real progress here. This is not the same Nats from 2022 and 2023. They have made real strides. There is legitimate young talent. There are some challenges still, of course, and they've still got holes, and there's still things that you wish they were in a better position to handle. But I don't think you can objectively look at this and not acknowledge that they've made significant progress from where they were a couple of years ago. You just hope it now starts to show up in the one-loss record.
The Nats for last regular season were 22nd out of 30 major league teams in average home attendance, 24,287. I think the product on the field, of course, ultimately dictates attendance more than anything, but look, you can't ignore that there has been this rising sentiment against ownership, anger at ownership, and you wonder if that impacts attendance. If people say, well, I'll watch the team's games, but I'm not going to actively give money to ownership because I don't like the lack of spending in these off seasons. So we'll see. But, that attendance for last season is not terrible, all things considered, and be interesting to see what that ends up being for this coming season. But again, if the team does well, people will show up. And if the team doesn't do well, then, you're going to be in the bottom third of MLB. Well, we are excited for this 2025 Nats season. We are excited for this season number 5 of this podcast. We appreciate you listening very much. You can find us on X at Nats_chat. You can find us on Blue Sky at Nats Chat Podcast. You can email us, natschatpodcast@gmail.com, including if you would like to send a shout out to someone who you care about, a birthday wish, a congratulations, a get well, whatever. And we have a shout out to deliver on this season preview installment of the podcast. It comes to us from Hadia Fussfield. Writes Hadia, happy birthday to my husband, Eric Fussfield, the official rabbi of the Nats Chat podcast and one of the show's most loyal listeners. Rabbi Eric is a diehard Nats fan and is feeling a lot of spilkis, parentheses, anxiety about the team's 5 straight losing seasons, as it is written, for everything there is a season, so perhaps this will be the season the team turns things around. Either way, my husband looks forward to your show's excellent coverage as we get ready for the highs and lows of another year of baseball in the nation's capital. Hadia, thank you. And Rabbi, we say happy birthday to you, and thank you for your counsel and wisdom for all of these years.
I hope we don't need to consult the rabbi too much this year to help us get through our spilkis about the team. Hopefully things go well and we can all enjoy it and he himself can enjoy it. But he's been a loyal listener, has provided shout outs to us before, which we appreciate. It's nice of his wife, Hadia, to now reverse it and give the shout out to Rabbi Eric himself. Hope you guys enjoy the season.
The rabbi is outstanding. We appreciate him and his wife supporting the podcast so much. Well, that will do it for this installment of the podcast. The next episode of the podcast will be after game number 1 of the Nats 2025 regular season. Remember, a new episode of the show for the morning after every Nats regular season and perhaps postseason game day. All Nationals radio highlights on Nats Chat are courtesy of 106.7 The Fan. For Mark Zuckerman, I'm Al Galdi. We thank you for listening, and we will talk to you next time on the Nats Chat podcast.
Hey, we wound up 5-11. Not very good. But there were some worse than us. I guess that's one positive way to look at it. We weren't the worst team in the league.